A young woman with fire in her eyes and a grief so profound it could turn the very dust to ash. It's a story of a family slaughtered, a vow of vengeance, and the return of a silent shooter whose past is about to collide with the present in a storm of blood and betrayal. The fire was a hungry, malevolent beast, its orange and red tongues licking at the night sky, its roar a sound of pure, elemental fury. It was consuming everything. The small, sturdy ranch house her father had built with his own two hands. The barn that had always smelled of hay and horses. The life that, only an hour ago, had been hers. 17-year-old Clara Thorne lay hidden in a shallow, brush-choked arroyo, her body a tight, trembling knot of terror and a new, cold, and utterly alien emotion. Profound, all-consuming hatred. The smoke was a thick, acrid blanket, but through the swirling haze, she could still see them. The men who had done this. They were a pack of wolves, their faces lit by the hellish, dancing light of the fire they had set. They moved with a casual, swaggering brutality, their laughter a grotesque, ugly sound that would be seared into her memory forever. There were a dozen of them, led by a man with a face like a hawk and eyes as dead and as cold as a winter stone. His name was Silas Kane, and he had just murdered her family. She had seen it. She had been in the barn, tending to a sick foal, when they had ridden in. She had seen them drag her father and her older brother, Jacob, out into the yard. She had heard Kane's voice, a low, chillingly calm sound, asking about the map. She had seen her father's proud, defiant shake of the head. And she had seen the flash of gunfire, had seen her father and brother crumple to the ground like discarded sacks of grain. Her mother's scream from the house had been cut short by another, final shot. She had been found, a whimpering, terrified girl in the hayloft, by one of Kane's men. He had dragged her out, his rough hands bruising her arms. But before he could do anything else, Kane had stopped him. "Leave her," Kane had said, his cold eyes flicking over her with a look of utter, dismissive contempt. "She's nothing. A frightened rabbit. Let her run. Let her live with the memory." And so they had. They had set the fires and had ridden away, leaving her in the ruins of her life, alone, insignificant survivor in a graveyard of her own making. They thought they had left her broken. They were wrong. They had left her forged. As the last of the riders disappeared into the night, a new, terrible calm settled over Clara. The terror receded, burned away by the white-hot fire of her new, singular purpose. She would not run. She would not break. She would hunt. She would find these men, every last one of them, and she would kill them. It was a vow, a sacred, blood-soaked oath made to the ghosts of her family. She crawled from her hiding place, the smoke stinging her eyes, her lungs burning. She went to the bodies of her father and her brother, and in the flickering, terrible light of the burning house, she knelt and said her goodbyes. She took her father's heavy, silver pocket watch, its crystal shattered, its hands frozen at the moment of his death. She took the simple, leather-bound Bible her mother always kept by her bed, its edges scorched but its contents intact. And she took one other thing. From around her own neck, she unclasped a small, silver locket. It was a beautiful, intricate thing, a gift from a man she had only known as Uncle Elias, a mysterious, scholarly man who had been her father's best friend, a man who had visited them only once. A long, long time ago, when she was just a small child. She opened the locket. On one side was a tiny, faded daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. On the other, a picture of Elias himself, a handsome, intense man with sad, intelligent eyes. But the pictures were a lie. They were a cover. With a small, sharp fingernail, she pried the image of her parents away. Beneath it was not a hollow space, but another, secret image. It was a small, meticulously engraved, and utterly identical copy of the seal on a U.S. Marshal's badge. And beneath the image of Elias was a single, cryptic address, the Nightingale Club, San Francisco. Her father had been a simple rancher, or so she had thought. But he had secrets, and he had a very powerful, and very dangerous, friend. A friend who had given her this locket, this emergency beacon, a long time ago. If you are ever in a trouble so deep that God himself cannot see you, Elias had told her, a strange, sad smile on his face, send this to me. I will come. She had no money. She had no horse. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a few precious mementos, and a vow of vengeance that was now the only thing keeping her alive. She turned her back on the burning ruins of her home and began to walk. She walked east, towards the distant, faint lights of the nearest town, a place called Redemption. It was a long, and a very dangerous, walk. But every step was a beat in the drum of her own, new, and very deadly heart. The frightened rabbit was gone. In her place was a hunter, and her first stop was the telegraph office. The Nightingale Club in San Francisco was a place of opulent, decadent, and very discreet secrets. It was a gentleman's club, but its clientele was a mixture of the city's most powerful politicians, its wealthiest industrialists, and its most dangerous and influential criminal masterminds. It was a place where fortunes were won and lost, where empires were built and shattered, all under a haze of expensive cigar smoke and the clinking of crystal whiskey glasses. The owner of this exclusive and very dangerous establishment was a woman known only as the Nightingale. She was a figure of mystery and legend, a woman of breathtaking, ageless beauty. Her hair a cascade of silver, her eyes the color of old, faded jade. She moved through her club like a queen in her court, her presence a thing of quiet, absolute authority. No one knew where she had come from. They only knew that she saw everything, heard everything, and that her favor was a thing to be courted, and her displeasure a thing to be feared. She was in her private, soundproofed office, a room of dark, polished mahogany and red velvet, when the telegram arrived. It was delivered by a nervous, white-eyed messenger boy who was clearly terrified to be in her presence. She took the telegram, her long, elegant fingers adorned with a single, magnificent emerald ring. She read the single, cryptic sentence, "The locket is broken." A profound, transformative stillness settled over her. The sophisticated, enigmatic, and untouchable owner of the Nightingale Club was gone. In her place was a woman named Serafina. And a lifetime ago, she had been an assassin, a specialist in poisons and infiltration, a member of a legendary, four-person team known as the Order of the Sparrowhawk. Elias, the scholar, had been their leader. And Clara's father, a man named Michael, had been one of them. He had been their heart. The locket was their emergency signal, a call to arms that had not been used in 15 long, quiet years. A call that meant one of their own was either dead, or in a trouble so deep that only a ghost could pull them out. She dismissed the messenger boy with a wave of her hand. She stood and walked to the large, ornate, gilded mirror that covered one wall of her office. She looked at her reflection, at the elegant, powerful woman she had become. It was a lie. A beautiful, carefully constructed lie. She pressed a hidden catch at the side of the mirror. It swung open, revealing not a wall, but a room. A secret room. Her real room. It was not a place of luxury. It was a Spartan, ruthlessly efficient space. On one wall was an arsenal of strange, exotic, and very deadly weapons, a blowgun, a set of gleaming, surgical steel throwing knives, a tiny, single-shot pistol disguised as a perfume bottle. On another was a laboratory, a collection of glass vials, beakers, and burners, a place where she had once practiced the dark, beautiful art of the poisoner. And in a large, steel-banded trunk was her old life. She opened it. She stripped off her fine, silk dress. She donned the simple, practical, and dark clothes of a traveler. She strapped the throwing knives to her thigh. She took the small, deadly perfume bottle. She was no longer the Nightingale of San Francisco. She was Serafina, the ghost of the Order. She had built an empire of secrets and whispers to protect herself from the past. But the past had just kicked in her door. Michael, the kindest, gentlest, and most tragic of all of them, the one who had walked away from their bloody life to seek a quiet, simple peace, that peace had been shattered. She did not know who had done it. She did not know why. But she knew, with an absolute, unshakable certainty, that she was about to unleash a storm of retribution so profound, so complete, that the world would remember, in blood and in fire, why they had once called her the Nightingale. Her song had once been a lullaby of death, and she was about to sing it again. The town of Redemption was a hard and forgiving place, but it had a core of rough, frontier decency. Clara Thorne, when she stumbled into town, a waif-like figure of soot and grief, was taken in by the town's doctor, a kind, world-weary man named Doc Evans. She did not tell him her story. She did not have to. The story was in her haunted, empty eyes. She did not stay long. She used the few precious dollars the doctor gave her not for food or room, but to buy a horse, a scrawny, ill-tempered nag that was all she could afford, and a gun. She went to the town's gunsmith, a man named Schmidt. She did not want a rifle. She did not want a shotgun. She wanted a pistol, a gunfighter's gun. Schmidt, seeing the cold, hard fire in the young girl's eyes, a fire that was far too old for her years, tried to dissuade her. He showed her a small, ladylike derringer. "No," she said, her voice a low, steady sound that held no trace of a 17-year-old girl. "I want that one." She was pointing to a Colt Peacemaker, its barrel long, its grip worn, a heavy, serious, and professional weapon. She had no idea how to use it, but she was a fast learner. She took the gun and the horse and she rode out of Redemption, not back towards the ruins of her home, but into the vast, empty wilderness of the Badlands. She was not running. She was training. She was her father's daughter. He had taught her to ride, to track, to read the land. But he had never taught her to shoot. That was a part of the life he had tried to leave behind. So now, she had to teach herself. Her first few days were a clumsy, frustrating, and painful lesson. The Colt was a heavy, bucking beast in her small hands. Her shots were wild, her aim pathetic. She was a danger only to the rocks and the cacti that surrounded her. But she was driven by a force that was stronger than her frustration. She was driven by the memory of her father's face, of her mother's scream, of the casual, contemptuous laughter of Silas Kane. She practiced from sunup to sundown. She learned to control her breathing. She learned to squeeze the trigger, not to pull it. She learned to become one with the weapon, to make it an extension of her own, and bending will. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to get better. She began to hit the cans she set up on rocks. She began to hit them consistently. She began to hit them from a distance. And as she practiced with the gun, another, more profound change was happening to her. The soft, gentle, horse-whispering girl was being burned away in the hot, repetitive fire of her training, leaving behind something harder, leaner, and infinitely more dangerous. She learned to live off the land, to find water, to trap small game. She became a creature of the wilderness, her senses honed to a razor's edge. And she began to hunt. Not men. Not yet. She began to hunt the small, scattered groups of coyotes and rustlers who preyed on the isolated homesteads. She was not a lawwoman. She was not a vigilante. She was a student, and this was her classroom. She would watch them for days, a silent, unseen ghost, learning their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. And then, she would strike. Not to kill, but to dismantle. She would shoot the gun out of a man's hand from 50 yards. She would steal their horses in the dead of night, leaving them afoot in the middle of nowhere. She became a whisper, a ghost story, the mysterious angel of the Badlands who was plaguing the small-time outlaws of the territory. She was getting a reputation, and she was getting good. Frighteningly good. One evening, a month after she had ridden out of Redemption, she was sitting by her small, hidden campfire, cleaning her Colt, her movements now a familiar, practiced ritual. She heard a sound, the soft, almost inaudible snap of a twig behind her. She moved with a speed that was not a thought, but an instinct. The Colt was in her hand, cocked and aimed, in a single, fluid motion. A woman stood at the edge of her firelight. She was beautiful, her hair a cascade of silver in the moonlight, her eyes the color of old jade. She was dressed in the dark, practical clothes of a traveler, and she held her hands up, open and empty, in a gesture of peace. "You are very, very good," the woman said, her voice a low, silken murmur that was both a compliment and a profound, and very professional, appraisal. "You have your father's eyes, and you have my hands." Clara stared at her, her pistol never wavering. She did not know this woman, but she saw the small, almost invisible throwing knife strapped to her thigh. She saw the way the woman stood, perfectly balanced, a creature of absolute, and very deadly, calm. "My name is Serafina," the woman said. "A long time ago, your father and I were colleagues. I received a message. It said the locket was broken. The student had just met her master. The training was over. The real lesson, the lesson of revenge, was about to begin. The arrival of Serafina was the arrival of a ghost from a world Clara had never known existed. The two women sat by the small, flickering campfire, a strange, stark contrast of youth and age, of raw and tamed talent and a cool, refined, and utterly lethal mastery. Serafina was a revelation. She was not just a gunfighter. She was an artist of a dozen different, deadly disciplines. And she was a teacher. Your father was a good man, Serafina said, her voice a low, quiet murmur in the stillness of the night. The best of us. He was our heart. He walked away from our world to protect you, to give you a life of peace. That peace has been stolen, and we are going to take it back. She then began Clara's real education. It was a brutal, relentless, and unforgiving curriculum. It was the school of the shadows. The gun is a clumsy, noisy tool, child, Serafina said, as she watched Clara practice her draw. It is the weapon of a brawler. Our work is the work of an artist. It requires finesse. It requires subtlety. She taught Clara the art of the blade. She showed her how to throw a knife, not with the brute force of her arm, but with a flick of her wrist, a movement of pure, economic grace. She taught her where to strike, the small, vulnerable places on a man's body where a single, well-placed inch of steel could be instantly fatal. She taught her the art of poisons. She showed her the plants of the desert, the ones that could heal, and the ones that could kill. She taught her how to distill their essences, how to deliver them with a pinprick, a drop in a drink, a fine, invisible powder. And she taught her the most important lesson of all, the art of the mind. Your greatest weapon is not the gun, or the knife, or the poison, she said, her jade green eyes intense in the firelight. It is your enemy's own mind. His greed, his fear, his pride. You must learn to see these things, to understand them, and to use them against him. You do not just fight a man's body. You dismantle his soul. For a month, they lived and trained in the wilderness, a master and her prodigy. Clara was a gifted student, her young, sharp mind absorbing every lesson, her body, hardened by her own solo training, becoming a fine-tuned instrument of her will. The raw, angry, grief-fueled girl was being transformed, tempered in the cold, precise fire of Serafina's knowledge. She was becoming a weapon. And while they trained, they hunted. They were no longer just a rumor in the Badlands. They were a force. They began to systematically dismantle Silas Kane's smaller, outlying operations. They would raid his whiskey-running caravans, not to steal the whiskey, but to poison it. They would infiltrate his horse-thieving camps and use a subtle, herbal agent to sicken the animals, rendering them useless. They were ghosts to women who moved through the territory, leaving a trail of chaos and confusion in their wake. And they were sending a message to Silas Kane, a message that his world was no longer safe, that the rabbit he had left for dead had grown teeth, and had found a wolf to teach her how to use them. Silas Kane, in his heavily fortified headquarters in the boomtown of Purgatory's Gate, was a man consumed by a new, and very personal, obsession. He had heard the stories. He knew it was the girl he had so arrogantly and foolishly let live. He had sent his best men after her, and they had either disappeared or had come back with wild, terrified stories of a ghost, a phantom, a silver-haired devil who fought with poison and shadows. He put a price on their heads, a massive bounty, one that drew every killer, every bounty hunter, every piece of human scum from 100-mile radius. Purgatory's Gate became a hornet's nest of greed and ambition, all of it focused on finding the two mysterious and very deadly women who were making a mockery of his power. Serafina and Clara knew that the time for training was over. The time for the final exam was at hand. He has gathered all the snakes into one basket, Serafina said, a cold, grim smile on her lips. It will make the extermination that much easier. They were not going to run. They were not going to hide. They were going to walk directly into the heart of the hornet's nest. They were going to Purgatory's Gate, and they were going to burn it to the ground. Purgatory's Gate was a town that had sold its soul to the highest bidder, and that bidder was Silas Kane. The town was his personal fiefdom, its sheriff his paid lackey, its saloons and gambling dens the engine of his corrupt empire. With the new, massive bounty on the heads of the two mysterious female phantoms, the town had become a magnet for every hard case and killer in the territory. It was a viper's nest, a place of loud, boastful men and cheap, easy violence. It was into this cauldron of masculine aggression that Serafina and Clara walked, not as warriors, but as moths to a flame. They were no longer the dusty, buckskin-clad ghosts of the Badlands. They were transformed. Serafina was once again the Nightingale, a wealthy, elegant widow from New Orleans, her silver hair coiled in an elaborate, fashionable style, her dress a creation of silk and lace, her emerald ring a flash of cold, green fire on her hand. She was the very picture of money, of class, and of a certain, refined vulnerability. Clara was her ward, her niece, a stunningly beautiful, innocent-looking young woman, her fiery red hair a beacon, her blue eyes wide with a carefully feigned naivete. She was a flower, a hothouse rose, seemingly out of place in this rough, brutal world. They arrived on the evening stagecoach, their luggage a collection of fine, leather-bound trunks. They took the presidential suite at the town's only decent hotel, a place that was now the unofficial headquarters for the bounty hunters who had come to claim Kane's gold. They were the perfect bait, and the sharks began to circle immediately. Their strategy was a classic one, a masterpiece of infiltration and misdirection that was Serafina's signature. They did not seek out their enemies. They let their enemies come to them. Serafina began to host a high-stakes, invitation-only poker game in her suite every night. The stakes were astronomical, the whiskey was the finest, and the company was the most dangerous in town. Silas Kane's top lieutenants, and the most prominent of the bounty hunters, all vied for a seat at her table. She was not just playing cards. She was gathering intelligence. She was a master of reading men, of finding their weaknesses, their vanities, their secrets. She learned the entire structure of Kane's organization, the names of his key men, the sources of his power. And Clara was the beautiful, silent, and utterly deadly lure. She would sit by her aunt's side, a picture of innocent beauty, her presence a potent, intoxicating distraction. But she was listening. She was watching. She was the ghost at the table, her mind a cold, clear, and logical instrument, absorbing every detail, every boast, every slip of the tongue. They began their work. It was not a work of guns and bullets. It was a work of whispers and poison. A particularly brutish bounty hunter, a man who had boasted of his role in a recent massacre of a peaceful Indian village, was found dead in his hotel room, a single, almost invisible needle prick on his neck, his face a peaceful, serene mask. A death from a heart attack. Serafina's work. One of Kane's most trusted lieutenants, a man who controlled his whiskey-running operation, suddenly came down with a mysterious, debilitating illness, a sickness that left him a weak, trembling, and useless wreck. A slow-acting, nerve-debilitating poison that Clara had slipped into his nightly glass of brandy. They began to turn their enemies against each other. They would plant a rumor here, a piece of forged evidence there. A high-stakes card game would be rigged, not to win money, but to create a feud between two of Kane's most powerful captains. The Viper's nest was beginning to turn on itself. Silas Kane, from his fortified headquarters, watched the strange, slow, and inexplicable disintegration of his empire with a growing sense of a cold, creeping dread. He knew who the two beautiful, mysterious women at the hotel were. His instincts, the instincts of a predator, screamed it at him. But he had no proof. He could not just kill them. They were, on the surface, wealthy, well-connected ladies. To move against them openly would be to invite the attention of a different, more powerful kind of law. He was trapped. He was being dismantled, from the inside out, by a force he could not see, a poison he could not identify. The final act of their brilliant, bloody, and very personal play was at hand. They had softened the target. They had sown the seeds of chaos. Now, it was time for the final, bloody harvest. And it would take place at the one event that was the symbol of Silas Kane's absolute power and control over the town, the annual Founders' Day Ball. The Founders' Day Ball was the glittering, fraudulent heart of Silas Kane's empire. It was an annual command performance, a night where the forced smiles of the subjugated populace were meant to reflect the brilliant, absolute power of their master. The Purgatory's Gate Opera House, a grand, gaudy structure built with stolen money and fear, was filled to its gilded rafters. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, French champagne, and a simmering and spoken resentment that was as palpable as the heat from the 1,000 candles that lit the ballroom. Serafina and Clara were the center of this dangerous, glittering world. They moved through the crowd not as guests, but as generals reviewing their troops on the eve of a decisive battle. Every smile, every polite nod, every seemingly innocent piece of gossip they exchanged was a part of a meticulously choreographed, deadly ballet. Serafina was a vision in silver silk, a dress that seemed woven from moonlight and shadows. Diamonds glittered in her silver hair and at her throat, a cold, hard fire that matched the light in her jade-green eyes. She was the nightingale, and her song tonight would be a siren's call, luring the most powerful men in the room to their ruin. Her primary weapon was a small, exquisitely engraved silver flask, which she claimed held a special, very old New Orleans brandy. Its true contents were a custom distilled sedative, a compound of her own devising, tasteless, odorless, and in precisely 1 hour, profoundly effective. Clara was a breathtaking vision in emerald green, a color that set off the fiery cascade of her red hair and the startling, clear blue of her eyes. She was a picture of youthful innocence, a hothouse rose in a den of wolves. But her mind was a cold, clear, and logical instrument, her senses alive to every nuance of the room, every shift in the balance of power. She was the beautiful, deadly lure, the innocent-looking bait that would draw the master of the hunt, Silas Kane himself, into the final, fatal trap. Their plan was a three-pronged attack, a masterpiece of synchronized, lethal precision, a final, bloody symphony that they had been composing for a month. Serafina moved through the crowded ballroom, a charming, witty, and utterly deadly presence. She was the perfect, gracious guest, her conversation sparkling, her smile intoxicating. She sought out her targets with a surgeon's precision, Kane's top 5 lieutenants, the brutal, competent men who were the pillars of his power. There was Dutch, the brutish enforcer, Lefty, the cynical, fast gun second in command, quiet, deadly man named Carver who was Kane's chief of intelligence, and 2 others, the Calloway brothers, who ran his rustling operations. To each, she offered a taste from her silver flask, a special honor, a shared secret from her personal stash. They were powerful men, men who trusted no one, but they were also vain men. And the attention of the beautiful, enigmatic nightingale was a drug more potent than any whiskey. They drank, their egos stroked, their guards momentarily lowered, completely unaware that they had just ingested a slow-acting poison that would, by the stroke of midnight, turn them from predators into helpless, sleeping prey. Clara, meanwhile, had her own, equally critical, mission. Her target was the town's telegraph office, the nerve center of Kane's communication, his link to the outside world. While the rest of the town was at the ball, the office would be deserted, save for a single, bored operator. She played her part to perfection. In the middle of a dance with a young, infatuated bounty hunter, she feigned a swoon, a moment of girlish weakness in the hot, crowded ballroom. With a flurry of concerned whispers, she was escorted to a small, private retiring room to recover. The room, as she and Serafina had already ascertained, had a back window that overlooked a quiet, dark alley. She slipped out the window, a silent, green-clad shadow in the night. She moved with a speed and a grace that would have terrified the men who had just been fawning over her. She reached the telegraph office. The lock was a simple, clumsy thing. She opened it with a hairpin, a simple trick Serafina had taught her in their first week together. The lone telegraph operator, a young man dozing in his chair, was startled awake by her sudden, silent appearance. Before he could even cry out, a small, but very sharp, knife was at his throat. "Make a sound," Clara whispered, her voice a low, cold sound that held no trace of the sweet, innocent girl from the ballroom, "and it will be your last." She tied and gagged the man with a practiced, efficient speed. She was not there to send a message. She was there to prevent one. She did not destroy the telegraph machine. That would be too obvious, too crude. She was an artist. She subtly and expertly rewired it, a small, almost invisible piece of sabotage, crossing 2 of the main contact wires. Any outgoing message would now be a garbled, nonsensical string of characters. Any incoming message would be a silent, unanswered plea. She had cut the serpent's tongue. Silas Kane was now alone, trapped in a cage of his own making, a cage of silence. The final, and most deadly, prong of the attack was not even in the building. It was a ghost, a legend, a man who had for a month been a quiet and seen, but very much felt, presence in the high country around Purgatory's gate. His name was Elias, the scholar, the man Clara had known as Uncle Elias, the man who was the true and secret third member of their reunited team. He had received Serafina's coded message, a simple note about a rare, night-blooming flower that was due to bloom on the night of the Founders' Day ball, and he had come. He was the ghost at this deadly feast, and his job was the most important of all, to be the blade that would cut the head from the snake. While the ball was in full swing, while Serafina was serving her poison chalice and Clara was silencing the wires, Elias was moving through the darkened, empty town. His targets were the outposts, the guard houses, the places where Kane's power was rooted. He moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, a master of the blade and the silent kill. He was not a warrior, he was an exterminator, and he was cleansing the town of its vermin, one silent, surgical strike at a time. He took out the 4 guards at the main livery, the 4 at the bank, the 2 that were watching the town's main road. He was a whisper of death, his Spanish fighting daggers his instruments, his movements a fluid, deadly, and utterly silent dance. Back at the ball, the clock was ticking. The sedative was beginning to take effect. Kane's lieutenants were beginning to look flushed, their speech slurring, their movements becoming clumsy and uncoordinated. The foundations of the empire were crumbling, from the inside out. Silas Kane, from his self-appointed throne on a raised dais overlooking the ballroom, was watching Clara. He had been obsessed with her since she had arrived, her innocent beauty a strange and settling puzzle to his dark, cynical mind. He saw her return to the ballroom, her face a little pale, but her smile as radiant as ever. He made his move. He descended from his dais and approached her, his presence parting the crowd like a ship's prow through water. He was a man who was about to claim his prize. "You are the most beautiful thing this town has ever seen, my dear," he said, his voice a low, possessive purr. He offered her his arm. "Perhaps you would allow me to show you the gardens. It is a beautiful night." It was a command, not a request. And it was the final, fatal mistake of his life. Clara took his arm, her touch as light as a butterfly's wing, her heart a cold, steady, and triumphant drumbeat in her chest. "I would be honored, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice a sweet, innocent melody. She led him out of the hot, crowded, and now very much doomed, ballroom, out into the cool, moonlit gardens. She was leading the wolf into a trap of her own making. The student had become the master, and the final, deadly lesson was about to be delivered. The gardens of the Purgatory's Gate Opera House were a lie. They were a small, pathetic attempt at civilized beauty in a world of raw, brutal wilderness, a place of wilting roses and dusty, moon-drenched paths that could not quite hide the harsh and forgiving land that surrounded them. Tonight, they would be a dueling ground, a final, intimate stage for a very personal war. Silas Kane led Clara to a secluded, stone bench near a crumbling, silent fountain, his hand a proprietary, possessive weight on her arm. He was a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, and he wanted her. He saw her as the final jewel in his crown, the ultimate symbol of his conquest of this territory, a beautiful, innocent prize to be claimed. "This is a fine party, Mr. Kane," Clara said, her voice a sweet, innocent murmur, as she sat, carefully arranging the folds of her emerald green dress. Her mind, however, was a cold, calculating instrument. She was noting the angles, the shadows, the potential escape routes. She was mapping her battlefield. "You must be very proud of all you have built here. I am a man of vision, my dear," he said, sitting beside her, his voice a low, confident purr. He was enjoying this, the game of it, the seduction of this beautiful and touched flower. He was savoring his victory. "This town, this territory, it is just the beginning. I am building an empire, and an empire needs a queen." "And empires," she replied, her voice still that same, sweet melody, but with a new, chilling undertone that a more perceptive man would have recognized as the hiss of a snake, "are built on a foundation of bones, are they not?" He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his cold, dead eyes. There was a depth, a hardness, in this girl that he had not expected. She was not just a pretty face. "You are a very perceptive young woman," he said, his smile tightening, the hunter in him momentarily intrigued by the unexpected spirit of his prey. "I am a fast learner," she replied. She then looked at him, her blue eyes, in the pale moonlight, no longer wide and innocent, but as cold and as clear as chips of ice. "And I had a very good teacher. His name was Michael Thorne. He was my father. You may have known him. You murdered him." The transformation was absolute, and it was stunning. The innocent, naive girl was gone. In her place was the angel of the Badlands, a young woman who was the living embodiment of a righteous, and very personal, vengeance. Silas Kane's face, a moment before a mask of confident seduction, now contorted into a snarl of enraged surprise. He had been played. This entire, month-long performance, the beautiful widow, the innocent niece, it had all been a lie. A brilliant, intricate, and very deadly lie. He lunged for her. He was a big man, a creature of brutal, overwhelming force. He was used to his physical power being the final, decisive answer to any problem. But Clara was a creature of speed and grace. She was not there. She moved with a dancer's fluid, impossible speed, a green-clad phantom in the moonlight. As he stumbled, his lunge meeting only empty air, a flash of silver appeared in her hand. A long, thin, and perfectly balanced throwing knife. "My father taught me many things," she said, her voice now a low, cold whisper that seemed to echo the voice of the ghost who had haunted his men in the hills. She was circling him now, a graceful, deadly predator, the hunter and the hunted having suddenly, and irrevocably, switched roles. "He taught me how to gentle a horse. He taught me how to read the stars. He taught me how to be a good and decent person. But he never taught me how to kill a man." She stopped, her body perfectly balanced, the knife held loosely, ready, in her hand. "But I have had other teachers since then, and they have taught me everything." With a flick of her wrist, the knife flew, a silent, silver streak in the moonlight. It did not strike him. It struck the stone cherub on the fountain behind him, the point of the blade embedding itself deep in the stone, inches from his head, its handle quivering with the force of the impact. It was not an attack. It was a statement of skill, a demonstration, a promise. Kane, his face a mask of a new, dawning, and very real terror, scrambled for the pistol that was tucked into his own elegant waistcoat. But as his fingers closed around the grip, a new voice, a voice as smooth and as deadly as old silk, spoke from the shadows behind him. "I would not do that, if I were you." He spun, his heart leaping into his throat. A woman stood there, a vision of silver and diamonds, her face a mask of cold, beautiful fury. Serafina, the nightingale, and in her hand, she held a small, elegant, and very deadly-looking pistol, its long, thin barrel aimed directly at his heart. "The party is over, Mr. Kane," Serafina said, her voice a low, musical, and utterly final sound. "All of your men are indisposed. They are sleeping the sleep of the very, very unjust. And your telegraph line, I'm afraid, is out of order. There will be no reinforcements. There will be no escape. There is only us." He was trapped, caught between the student and the master, the avenging angel and the ghost, a young woman's righteous fury and an older woman's cold, professional wrath. But Silas Kane was not a man to be taken easily. He was a cornered wolf, and he still had his fangs. With a final, desperate roar, he did not charge at the women. He dove sideways through a thick, thorny rose bush, a desperate, scrambling flight for the cover of the opera house, for the chaos of the ballroom, for any chance at all. He was fast, but he was not fast enough. As he crashed through the roses, a third figure descended from the balcony above, a silent, dark-clad specter of death. Elias, the scholar. He had been there all along, a patient, silent observer, the final, deadly piece of their perfectly orchestrated trap. He landed with a silent, cat-like grace, his two long Spanish fighting daggers a blur of silver in his hands. He did not kill the man. He was a surgeon, and this was a delicate, precise operation. 2 lightning-fast, and utterly final cuts to the back of Kane's knees. Silas Kane screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony, as his legs, the tendons severed, gave way beneath him. He collapsed in a heap, a crippled, broken thing, at the feet of the 3 silent, and very much reunited members of the Order of the Sparrowhawk. The dance in the moonlight was over. The final, bloody score was about to be settled. The ballroom of the Purgatory's Gate Opera House had become a scene from a strange, surreal, and very quiet dream. The music had long since died. The dancers were still. A dozen of Silas Kane's most dangerous men, the core of his power, were slumped in their chairs or on the floor, their heads resting on the tables, their mouths slack, their fine clothes in disarray. They were not dead. They were sleeping, their violent souls temporarily banished to a land of deep and very peaceful dreams, courtesy of Serafina's special New Orleans brandy. The townspeople, who had been the terrified and willing guests at this forced celebration, were now a huddled, silent, and utterly bewildered audience to the final act of a play they did not, and could not, understand. They had witnessed the sudden, silent collapse of their oppressors, and now they were about to witness the judgment. The doors to the moonlit garden were thrown open, and Elias and Serafina entered, dragging the crippled, weeping form of Silas Kane between them. They were followed by Clara, a beautiful, avenging angel in emerald green, her face a mask of cold, hard, and righteous fury. They dragged Kane to the center of the ballroom floor and threw him at the foot of his own self-appointed throne, the raised dais from which he had surveyed his short-lived kingdom. He lay there, a broken, pathetic heap of ruined ambition, his fine clothes torn and stained with his own blood and the dirt of the garden. The three of them, the scholar, the nightingale, and their prodigy, stood over him, a silent, implacable, and terrifying trinity of judgment. "Who are you people?" The town's mayor, a man whose courage had long since been eroded by compromise and fear, stammered from the crowd, his voice a thin, reedy sound in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. It was Serafina who answered, her voice a clear, cold bell that rang with an authority that was more absolute than any law. "We are a memory," she said, her jade-green eyes sweeping the room, seeming to look into the very soul of every person there. "We are the ghosts of all the people this man has wronged. We are the debt that has finally come due." She then turned her gaze back to the whimpering, broken man on the floor. "Silas Kane," she said, her voice the formal, final tone of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You have been found guilty of the crimes of murder, of theft, of a reign of terror that has stained this land with the blood of the innocent. You have been found guilty of the murder of Michael Thorne, a good and decent man. And for these crimes, you are sentenced to death." Kane, from the floor, let out a low, animal sound of pure, abject terror. "But we are not butchers," Elias added, his own voice a low, cold, and utterly emotionless whisper, a sound that was, in its own way, more terrifying than any shout. "We are artists, and a man's death should be a reflection of his life." He then laid out the terms of their judgment. It was not a judgment of a quick bullet or a clean rope. It was a judgment worthy of the sparrowhawks, a thing of cruel, poetic, and terrible irony. "You will be given a horse," Elias said, "and a single skin of water. You have built your empire in the wilderness. You have claimed to be its master. So, we will return you to it, and you will be given a 1-hour head start. You will ride out into the Badlands, the wilderness you sought to conquer, and then we will hunt you." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a final, terrifying whisper, a promise that was more absolute than any legal document. "But we will not hunt you with guns. The gun is a tool of a civilized, if brutal, world. You are no longer a part of that world. We will hunt you as the Apache hunt the deer, with the bow, and the blade, and the silence. You were a man who fancied himself a wolf. We will see how long you survive when you are the prey." It was a sentence of death, but it was also a sentence of terror, a slow, meticulous, and very personal dismantling of a man's soul before the final, inevitable end. It was a sentence of pure, unadulterated, and very creative, psychological torture. They dragged the man to his feet. They gave him his horse and his water, and they pointed him towards the vast, empty, and now very much terrifying, darkness of the wilderness. Silas Kane, his legs a useless, bloody ruin, hauled himself into the saddle. He looked back at the silent, watching faces in the ballroom. He saw no mercy. He saw no pity. He only saw the cold, hard, and utterly unforgiving faces of his own, personal, and very final, judgment. He spurred his horse and rode out into the night, a crippled, broken, and now very much hunted man, the ghost of his own imminent death already riding on his shoulder. The three sparrowhawks stood and watched him go. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold. The judgment had been passed. The hunt was about to begin. The hunt for Silas Kane was not a thing of haste. It was a slow, meticulous, and very personal ritual, a final, bloody lesson in the cruel poetry of the wilderness. For 3 days, the three sparrowhawks Leas, Seraphina, and Clara tracked their prey through the harsh and forgiving landscape of the Badlands. They were not just hunters, they were torturers, playing a cruel, psychological game with their quarry, dismantling him, piece by piece, from the inside out. They did not let him see them, but they let him know they were there. He would find a single, black fletched arrow, Clara's work, embedded in the trail just ahead of him, a silent, deadly promise of what was to come. He would find a small, dead animal, a rabbit or a snake, lying in his path, its death the result of a swift, silent poison, a calling card from Seraphina, a whisper of the many ways a man could die in this land. He would find his own crude trail markers mysteriously moved, sending him in circles, a quiet, mocking testament to the superior skill of Elias, the master strategist. They were stripping him bare, not just of his hope, but of his sanity. He was a man being haunted, his own guilty conscience and the vast, indifferent wilderness his only companions. His water ran out on the second day. His food was gone. His wounded legs were a constant, throbbing agony, a fiery torment that never ceased. He was a man being slowly, deliberately, erased from the world. On the 4th day, he could go no further. His horse, driven mad by thirst, had thrown him and bolted, disappearing into the heat haze. He was afoot, a crippled, stumbling wreck, his mind a feverish swamp of paranoia and terror. He collapsed at the mouth of a narrow, box canyon, a place of red rock and deep, eternal shadows, his body and his spirit finally, irrevocably, broken. He knew they were coming. He lay in the dust, the sun a merciless hammer on his head, and waited for the end. The three of them appeared at the mouth of the canyon, not as ghosts, but as solid, implacable figures of judgment, silhouetted against the setting sun. They moved with a slow, deliberate, and almost ceremonial grace. He looked at them, his eyes wide with a final, pleading terror. "Please," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound, the last, pathetic plea of a man who had never once in his life shown mercy. "Just end it." It was Clara who stepped forward. She was not the innocent, avenging angel anymore. She was a woman, hardened and forged in the fire of her own personal quest. She had come on this hunt not for the kill, but for this, for the final, face-to-face closure. In her hand, she held not a gun, not a knife, but a simple, leather-bound Bible. Her mother's Bible, the one she had saved from the fire. She knelt beside the broken, weeping man. She did not look at him with hatred. She looked at him with a kind of profound and deeply sad pity. She saw not a monster, but a man, a broken, pathetic, and ultimately insignificant man, who had been consumed by his own empty greed. She opened the Bible, its pages scorched and brittle. "My mother taught me," she said, her voice a low, clear sound in the quiet canyon, the sound of a strange and very hard-won peace, "that every life is sacred, and that the final judgment belongs not to us, but to God." She then did a thing that was more shocking, more unexpected, than any act of violence. She offered the man a canteen of water. She gave him a piece of dried meat. She took out a clean bandage from her saddlebag and, with a gentle, practiced hand, she tended to the festering wounds on his legs. Her movements were the gentle, practiced motions of a healer, not a killer. Elias and Seraphina watched, their own hard and cynical hearts stirred by a profound and long-forgotten emotion. They had taught this girl to be a killer. They had honed her skills, had sharpened her rage. But her father, the man of peace, had taught her to be something more. He had taught her to be a human being. And in this final, crucial moment, it was her father's lesson that had won out. They did not kill Silas Kane. They left him there, at the mouth of the canyon, with enough food and water to give him a choice. He could try to make his way back to the world, to face the law, to find some small, final, and almost certainly impossible, measure of redemption. or he could surrender to the wilderness, to the judgment of the land he had so brutally tried to conquer. His final fate was in his own, now trembling hands. The three of them, their vow of vengeance fulfilled, their bloody work done, turned and walked away. The ghost of the silent shooter, Clara's father, had had his own final, and most profound, victory. He had been avenged, not by an act of killing, but by an act of radical, and seemingly impossible, mercy. The cycle of violence had been broken, not by a bullet, but by a gesture of grace. The return of the three Sparrowhawks to Purgatory's Gate was a quiet, and very final, one. The town they returned to was in a state of chaotic, and very fragile, rebirth. The remaining, leaderless thugs from Kane's gang, the ones who had been left sleeping in the ballroom, had been rounded up by the town's newly formed and very enthusiastic militia and were now languishing in the town jail. But the town itself was in a state of terrified, anarchic limbo. The power vacuum left by Kane's sudden, violent departure was a dangerous and stable thing. Elias, Serafina, and Clara did not ride in as conquerors. They did not ride in as saviors. They came as a new, and very different, kind of law. Elias, the scholar, used his brilliant, strategic mind not to dismantle, but to build. He met with the town's merchants, its ranchers, its frightened, rudderless leaders. He did not give them orders. He gave them a plan. He organized them. He helped them to create a new town council, a new volunteer militia, a system of laws that was not based on the whim of a single, powerful man, but on the consent of the governed. He was not a politician, he was an architect of order, and his blueprint was a thing of simple, frontier democracy. Serafina, the nightingale, used her own, unique skills to heal. The town had been bled dry by Kane's greed, its resources plundered. She used her own, considerable fortune, the fortune she had built in San Francisco, to establish a new bank that gave fair loans to the ranchers and the merchants. A bank that was an investment in the town's future, not a tool of its oppression. She set up a makeshift hospital, her knowledge of herbs and medicines a godsend in a town that had been bled dry by violence and fear. She was not just a poisoner, she was a healer, and her gentle, competent hands brought a new, quiet hope to the sick and the wounded. And Clara became the soul of the new Purgatory's Gate. She was no longer the student, or the avenger. She was a leader. She organized a school for the town's children, in the now cleansed and reconsecrated upper house. She worked with the ranchers to round up the scattered herds, her intimate knowledge of the land and her almost mystical connection with the animals a thing of legend. She was a force of nature, a young woman of fierce, compassionate, and unwavering resolve. They were not the Calloways. They were not the assassins of the old order. They were something new. They were the founders of a new, and better, Purgatory's Gate, a town that would be built not on greed and fear, but on a foundation of courage, of community, and of a hard-won, and very real, grace. One evening, a year later, the three of them stood on the balcony of the Opera House, looking out over their new town. It was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of life, of laughter, of a quiet, bustling prosperity. The name, Purgatory's Gate, no longer seemed a fitting one. At a town meeting, they had chosen a new name for their reborn community. They called it Thorn's Hope. A lone rider approached the town. It was not an outlaw. It was a U.S. Marshal, a young, earnest man who had been sent to investigate the strange, miraculous reports of a town that had, seemingly, saved itself from the grip of one of the territory's most notorious outlaws. The three of them looked at each other, a quiet, knowing smile passing between them. Their work was not over. It was just beginning. They were the new, and seen, and very much in sanction, law in this forgotten corner of the West. They were the new order of the Sparrowhawk. And their silent, deadly, and very righteous war against the darkness had just found its new, and very permanent, home. The silent shooter had returned, not as a ghost of the past, but as the guardian of a new, and very hopeful, future.